All right, guys, so things are really starting to heat up in the Democratic Party as more and more people are calling on Joe Biden to drop out after his nightmare debate performance. So it's gotten to the point now where Joe seems to be feeling the pressure so much so that he's basically pulling like a Trump-style move here and calling into his favorite mainstream media show. Here we got Morning Joe, where he's going to rant and rage about the current situation that he's facing in basically full-blown denial that anything is wrong right now. So let's just go ahead and jump into this. I got a couple different parts that I picked out from this. Here we got the first question from Mika on, how he's going to make the American people feel better about his current situation and make sure that that kind of a performance that he showed at the debate never happens again.
Assure the American people that you won't have another night like the one you did in Atlanta.
Look at my career. I've not had many of those nights. It was a terrible night, and I really regret it happened. But the fact of the matter is, how can you assure you're going to be on faith that can intervene on your way to go to, work tomorrow?
What? I'm sorry, what? How can you make sure that, something's not going to intervene on your way to work tomorrow? What are we doing here, Joe? All right, let's continue.
Age wasn't, the idea I'm too old. Created over 15 million jobs, 21 million insured for the ACA, beat Big Pharma, relieved student debts for 5 million people, first black woman in the court. So I think I had a significant run, and that's how I'd measure me. Measure me what I've done. And by the way, in terms of my neurological capacity.
Okay, he's going to continue here. Now, I want you guys to understand that he was reading from a note card when he was just listing out some of his accomplishments of appointing the first, female black Supreme Court justice member and the student loan stuff. He was reading from a note card there, and that's not like a conspiracy. He later on at some point in this interview basically says that he's reading some of this stuff from a note card. But the first question was pretty simple. It was like, how are you going to make sure that that absolutely horrible debate performance where you basically show the entire country that you're senile, how are you going to make sure that that doesn't happen again? And again, he's in full-blown denial mode. I mean, he says, sure, it was a bad night, but then he goes on to say that age has nothing to do with it. I mean, on the one hand, sure, like, it's not just your age as in, like, the number, it's your mental capabilities that we can all see have absolutely fallen off a cliff. And that's not something that's, like, gonna get better over time. The age concerns were already present well before the debate night. That's actually what made it so bad for Joe Biden, is because going into the debate, that was already the main concern for voters about Joe Biden, was his age, was his senility, his cognitive ability, right? And so that was the current status going into the debate, and then you just solidified that in the minds of the American people. An overwhelming majority of who, at this point, don't think that you are cognitively capable of being the president. So it's not just like, oh, it was a bad night, let's brush it off, move forward, and then here, let me list out some of my accomplishments. This is not something you could just move past. But here he talks about, this neurological capability of his, which is in absolute perfect state. Let's go ahead and watch this.
I had a physical, a neurological physical as well in February. It's released. I released all my records, all of them. All of them. And I have a neurological test every single day. Try sitting behind this desk and making these decisions. You know it. Both of you know it.
Guys, that is almost word for word what Donald Trump said when there were similar concerns about him, right? You can't just say being the president every day is a neurological test. No, it's not. No, it's not. And in this interview, I believe, and in the other interview that we're going to watch a couple clips from, he outright refused to have some sort of an independent test done to see whether or not he has dementia, or some people have been floating the idea that it's possibly Parkinson's. In fact, I'll show you guys this reporting here real quick from the New York Times. They say Parkinson's expert visited the White House 8 times in 8 months. Now, the White House is saying that there's no signs of it and there's nothing to worry about here. I don't know, guys. You guys tell me. If you have a Parkinson's expert going to the White House 8 times in 8 months, that's almost once per month, it seems like there may at least be some concern there. Now, I'm not like a doctor, right? Some of this I'm just pulling out of my ass and reading from the reports. I can't determine whether or not he has early stage Parkinson's, or it seems like, to me at least, he has some pretty obvious signs of dementia. But, Point is, this is not stuff you can just brush off, right? This is not stuff you can just stick your head in the sand over, but it seems like that's exactly what his strategy is. Now, I want to move on to a couple other clips here. Let's just go ahead and jump in to the second bit here, where Biden gets a little bit more animated and heated and aggressive in this call-in with Morning Joe.
Times editorial board, The Economist, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Boston Globe, Jerry Nadler, Seth Moulton. Let me go to Julian Castro, Tim Ryan, David Axelrod, David Remnick, Richard Haas. Yeah, I know which one you're responding to there. Zeke Emanuel. But they are saying that you should step aside. So what is your plan of attack moving forward? These are pretty big names.
Is to go out and keep doing their big names, but I don't care what those big names think. They're wrong in 2020. They're wrong in 2022 about the red wave. They're wrong in 2024. And come out with me. Watch people react. You make a judgment. You make a judgment. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I'm going to have all these foreign leaders here. I've been in contact with the new British Prime Minister. Anyway.
What are we doing, guys? What are we doing, guys? I love that bit where he just goes, anyway, when he can't remember what his train of thought was. Guys, I don't know even how to respond to this, right? How do you respond to a guy who is just totally unwilling to grapple with the reality that's in front of him, right? I mean, these should not be complicated questions to answer, but he's not capable of doing it without sticking his head in the sand and pretending as if the debate didn't happen, pretending as if this concern is something he can just clear, the hurdle on easily. This is not going to happen. Okay, and I'll show you guys some of the polling data here in a bit, along with the multiple additional calls from, top Democrats telling him to drop out. Like, this is not going to be easy for him to push through. He may do it, and he may just refuse all the way through to the convention, and then maybe you're just stuck with him unless he just, drops dead one day. But, even just the fact that you have people like David Axelrod, and you have the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and the New York Times editorial board, and all of these very mainstream liberal outlets, and personalities, and strategists, and politicians who are calling on you to drop out, this should be ringing every alarm bell in your head that you could possibly imagine. This is every red flag that you could possibly imagine. These are not, pro-Trump MAGA people. These are some of your greatest allies in the media, and they are all calling on you to drop out. That's not something you could just overlook. Now, let's go ahead and skip ahead here to about 4:30 into this video, where he gets, again, increasingly more heated and basically, cast doubt on all of the haters and the naysayers.
Predicting beforehand it would not happen. Because I've got a pretty good political instinct and eye. And here's the deal. It's not going to happen here this time around. The American public is not going to move away from me as an average voter. And again, I'm here for two reasons, pal. One, to rebuild the economy for hardworking middle-class people, give everybody a shot. Just a straight shot. Everybody gets a fair chance, number one. Number two, remember all this talk about how I don't have the black support? Come on, give me a break. Come with me. Watch. I'm getting so frustrated by the elites. Now, I'm not talking about you guys, but about the elites in the party who they know so much more. But if any of these guys don't think I should run against me, go ahead, announce for president. Challenge me at the convention. On Europe, the polls are wrong in France. They're also right. There's no right wave or tide here in America either. By the way, in case you're wondering whether there is one, have you ever seen Trump run away so fast from what he's for?
Okay, so again, it's the same thing. It's the same thing, guys. They doubted me in 2020, they doubted me in 2022, and we overcame it. Now, let's keep in mind, guys, right? He did win in 2020, but I'm not sure exactly what he's talking about when he's saying everybody was doubting him in 2020. I think actually most people were saying, no, it's Joe has a really good chance of defeating Donald Trump. That was a terrible time for Donald Trump. The economy was in shambles. You had COVID going on. That was not, an uphill battle for Joe Biden. In fact, I think basically any generic Democrat would have had a great shot against Donald Trump back in 2020. So I'm not sure what he's talking about with that. Now in 2022, yeah, the media and most people did predict a massive red wave that didn't end up materializing in the way that some of the polls and some of the pundits thought that it would. But is that what we're staking all of this on? I want you guys to remember that this is the same party, okay? This is the same Democratic Party that is saying that if Trump wins this election, then democracy itself is over in this country. And you look at some of the polls that I'm going to show you guys here in a second, and it's like it went from being a coin flip, which it shouldn't have been initially, because your opponent is Donald Trump, okay? The same Donald Trump who, everybody despised when he was in the White House because of all of the chaos and all of his horrible policies, his major flagship one being a massive tax cut for wealthy billionaires and corporations. The same Donald Trump that went on to, do January 6th, the same Donald Trump who, basically still to this day will not accept the election results of the 2020 election. I mean, this is a guy who has an insane policy agenda that I think most of it is overwhelmingly unpopular with the American people. He's now a convicted felon, and this is a guy who you're in a coin flip with. But then it went from being a coin flip to now Trump is ahead everywhere. In basically every single recent poll, in every single swing state, Trump is winning by, in some cases, well outside the margin of error in some of these polls. So, I mean, again, it's utter delusion. It is utter delusion. And I don't know if that's part of Biden being senile that's making him, speak this way. But I guess this is just where we're at, guys. It seems like it's going to take some sort of like massive external force for, something to actually shake Joe Biden into shape. So let's just go ahead and move on to this other interview that he did actually before the Morning Joe one. So this was one of the main, big interviews he did after the debate. He's sitting here with George Stephanopoulos on ABC. And let's watch this little interesting part of this back and forth here.
I guess I'm asking a slightly different question. Have you had the specific cognitive tests, and have you had a neurologist, a specialist, do an examination?
No one said I had to. No one said, they said I'm good.
Would you be willing to undergo an independent medical evaluation that included neurological and cognitive tests and release the results to the American people?
Look, I have a cognitive test every single day. Every day I have that test. Everything I do. Not only am I campaigning, but I'm running the world. And that's not how it sounds like hyperbole. But we are the essential nation in the world. Madeleine Albright was right. And every single day, for example, today, before I come out here, I'm on the phone with the Prime Minister of, anyway, I shouldn't get into detail, but with Netanyahu. I'm on the phone with the new Prime Minister of England. I'm working on what we're doing with regard to, in Europe, with regard to expansion of NATO and whether it's going to stick. I'm taking on Putin. I mean, every day, there's no day I go through that are not those decisions I have to make every single day.
And
Guys, his basic response to these kinds of questions is just, watch me, right? Watch me. You guys are doubters, you're haters, watch me do this. And the reality is that we have been watching you. Why do you think you're doing the interview right now with George Stephanopoulos where he's having to repeatedly ask you about your cognitive abilities? It's because people have been watching you. The whole country just watched you in the first presidential debate, and you got up there and you showed everybody that you're senile. So you can't just turn around and keep saying, watch me, right? Oh, being the president is a cognitive test. Well, people are seeing you and have been seeing you as the president, and you failed. If that's the test, if demonstrating that you have cognitive capabilities by your actions as the president, if that's the test, then the American people have already overwhelmingly decided you have failed that test. And then also notice how some of the main things, and this was across in that Morning Joe interview as well, but in this one as well, multiple times throughout this, when he's trying to like prove his like bona fides or whatever, however you pronounce that word, I never know if it's bona fides or bona fides, I'm having a Joe Biden moment here, but he constantly brings it out to say, look at what I'm doing with NATO. Look at what I'm doing with China. Look at what I'm doing with Russia. Look at what I'm doing with Israel. And it's like, that's your bragging point? That's what you're going to run this campaign on? I mean, there are some other parts where he references his other policies, like we just saw with student debt forgiveness and infrastructure and whatever else. But he puts a massive emphasis on NATO expansion, right? The proxy war with Russia via Ukraine, and then Israel. And then also countering China. And at one point in this interview, he brings up that like we got Japan to dramatically increase their military spending. It's like, dude, when it comes to NATO expansion, when it comes to the war in Ukraine, when it comes to you supporting a genocide in Gaza via Israel, these are not popular things. You realize that, right? Like, it may be popular in Washington, D.C. elite circles, but it's not popular amongst the American people. In fact, for a while now, a majority of your own base of supporters, Democrats, believe that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza, that you are fully complicit in. So to bring that up as like, look at how I'm handling Israel. It looks like you're getting dog walked on Israel. That's what it looks like. It looks like Benjamin Netanyahu must have figured it out a long time ago, before our media did, that you're totally senile and that he can walk you around on a leash and have you do whatever the fuck he wants. That's what it looks like when it comes to Israel. You've looked incredibly weak throughout this entire thing. So I mean, all of this is just, it's all so pathetic. It's all so beyond the pale that it's almost genuinely shocking that we've gotten to this point now. He also went on in this interview to say only the Lord Almighty could convince me to quit. Because he was directly asked, like, listen, what if it's like Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi and Clyburn and all of your closest allies that get together and say you need to drop out? And he basically said, like, that's not going to happen. The only thing that can make me drop out is God himself. That's what he's saying now, guys. Again, utter delusion. Now, he also put out this letter here that he sent apparently to all of his fellow Democrats in the House and the Senate. And I want to just read to you because I skipped over making this point in those videos. But he's made this point over and over and over again. And I think it's just so dishonest that it needs to be addressed. So here's part of what he said in this letter to his fellow Democrats. He said, "We had a democratic nomination process, and the voters have spoken clearly and decisively. I received over 14 million votes, 87% of the votes cast across the entire nominating process. I have nearly 3,900 delegates, making me the presumptive nominee by wide margins. This was a process open to anyone who wanted to run. Only 3 people chose to challenge me. One fared so badly that he left the primaries to run as an independent." He's talking about RFK. "Another attacked me for being too old and was soundly defeated," but he was correct on that. "And the voters of the Democratic Party have voted. They have chosen me as the nominee of the party." He goes on to say basically that he doesn't think that it's fair to the voters to have some elites, within the Democratic Party decide to have him step down. Now, okay, on the one hand, sure, I don't conceptually like the idea of like Democrat Party delegates just getting to like hand pick a candidate. I don't like that idea. But in terms of like, if your main goal is defeating Donald Trump, that may literally be the last chance at having a possibility of defeating Donald Trump, because I don't think most people believe at this point that Joe Biden can actually do it. But the other thing to mention here is that there was no fair and open Democratic primary process. Okay, he's just totally lying about how that all played out. In some states, the Democratic Party literally just shut down the primary, like they did not have a primary. Not to mention the fact that the media and the entirety of the Democratic Party establishment were smearing or completely ignoring or pretending as if none of these other challengers even existed in the first place. So let's not pretend that this was like, oh, we had an open primary. You refused to do debates. Right? There was, in the mind of the Joe Biden campaign, there was no Democratic primary. So to then turn around and to be like, well, I won the Democratic Party nomination because we had a primary, and so therefore the voters have spoken, and we can't have elites step in. It's like, number one, we didn't have a fair and open Democratic primary. Okay, that's why you had people like Marianne and Dean Phillips instead of having people like, I don't know, Gavin Newsom and Gretchen Whitmer stepping into the race, because they did not feel that there was an actual chance to challenge you, right? So that's number one. But number two is, you can't talk about the elites. You can't rage against the elites when your entire fucking political career was backed by the elites. He literally used to have a nickname when he was a senator from Delaware. I think they used to call him the senator from MBNA, right? After the credit card company. Because of how corrupt he was, because of how in the pocket of wealthy corporations and billionaires Joe Biden was as a senator decades ago. So if your entire political career is built on money from the elites, is built on money from billionaires and corporations, you can't then turn around and be like, oh, it's the average working class Joe that wants me to stay in the race, and it's just the elites that are trying to push me out. You are the elite, okay? That's exactly who you are. That's exactly who you've always been. So let's not pretend as if this is some sort of like a popular move that he's trying to pull off here by rejecting the evil, scary, deep state elites that are pushing him out. And again, we're going to look at the polling data here. It's a vast majority of the country that at this point does not think that he's the best candidate that Democrats could put up. So just some of the latest here from the swing state polls. This is from Emerson. Nevada, Trump is up by 6 percentage points. In Pennsylvania, Trump is up by 5 percentage points. In Georgia, he's up by 5 percentage points. In Arizona, he's up by 4 percentage points. In Wisconsin, he's up by 3 percentage points. And in Michigan, he's up by 1 percentage point. And this is honestly closer than many of the other polls that I've seen recently. Okay, again, your opponent is Donald Trump. This should not be close. It shouldn't be close, let alone the fact that it's not close in the opposite direction, in the sense that you are getting absolutely curb stomped by this man at this point. I mean, is this not humiliating that this is what the polls are? This should not be a bragging point for you. As he said in part of that George Stephanopoulos interview, part of what he was bragging about was, oh, well, some of the pollsters close to me are saying it's a coin flip. It shouldn't be a fucking coin flip. Who are we kidding? Now, another one here. Replace Biden as the nominee. 64% of all voters, 55% of black voters, 66% of Hispanic voters, and 48% of Biden voters. Guys, we're only a couple months out from the election. The Democratic primary, even though it was a farce, already took place. This is unprecedented that this far into a campaign, half of your own voters would say, we need somebody else to step in, right? Biden is too old to be an effective president. Almost 70% of all voters. And again, a majority of black, Hispanic, and overall Biden voters. And this is from the New York Times pre-debate poll. Pre-debate, right? So again, people were already saying he was too old to be the president before the debate, which was an absolute disaster. Now, it was so much of a disaster, again, that top names are coming out. Some people who should be his closest allies are coming out and saying he has no chance. I mean, this was Obama's former chief strategist, David Axelrod. Biden is not winning this race. It's more likely that he'll lose by a landslide than win narrowly. This is Obama's former chief strategist who is saying, okay, that he has a better chance of getting absolutely wiped out by Trump than he does of even squeaking by a victory. I mean, this should be saying a lot, right? Again, especially to Democrats whose top priority is defeating Donald Trump. Apparently, these true blue liberals are willing to do everything in the world to defeat Donald Trump. They would do anything to defeat Donald Trump except put some pressure on the one guy who's about to allow Donald Trump to walk back into the White House. That's the one thing that they apparently won't do to defeat Donald Trump. Now, we also have this here. This is from Puck News. An A-plus Democratic Senate source reckons that of the 51 Democrats in the Senate, no more than half a dozen believe that he still has a plausible chance in November and want him to stay in the race, and the ratio on the House side, they say, is the same. Guys, that's about six Senate Democrats that say Biden has a plausible chance to victory. How is this even a question anymore? Now, the other thing to add on to this is all of these Democratic senators who are thinking behind the scenes and leaking to sources that they don't think Biden can win, you have to come out and say this publicly. You guys are absolute cowards for hiding behind these sort of leaked stories like this. You have to come out publicly, or else you can't pretend like your top priority is defeating Donald Trump. That's a total contradiction. You can't say democracy is on the ballot, but also I'm too scared to point out the fact that our current party leader is walking towards an utter defeat. You can't have those two things at the same time. Now, we also had some additional names here. We had, according to Punchbowl News here, 4 more senior House Democrats are asking for Biden to step aside. We had Jerry Nadler, right? Wasn't this the guy who once shit his pants? Okay? This is Jerry Nadler, who's also ancient as fuck, okay? He probably needs to step down himself, and even he is saying that Biden needs to step aside. We also had Mark Takano, Don Beyer, and Adam Smith. Now, another one here, because Representative Adam Schiff, also a close Biden ally, came out and said this. He says, given Joe Biden's incredible record, given Donald Trump's terrible record, he should be mopping the floor with Trump. Joe Biden's running against a criminal. It should not even be close, and there's only one reason that it is, and it's the president's age. And again, he's right, number one, and number two, that's not something he can fix. It's not something he can fix without stepping aside, right? And even if it was just to protect your own legacy, is that not even something that you care about? I mean, the idea that he's going to somehow pull off a miracle win and defeat Donald Trump in November, but then he's going to what after that, right? Does anybody really believe he's going to be able to run the country for the next 5 years? Is that what we're saying? I mean, it's ridiculous. You're simultaneously screwing the country. You're screwing even fellow Democrats in down ballot races that you're dragging down in the polls. But on top of that, you're even screwing yourself. Does none of your family surrounding you, Jill or Hunter or whoever else, do they not care about your health? Do they want you to just die in office one day? I really don't see how that's a stretch to say that that's a plausible thing that could end up happening, assuming he does somehow pull off a win in November, which again doesn't look too likely, right? Now we also have even Rob Reiner who's one of the biggest Democratic cheerleaders, coming out and saying, it's time to stop fucking around. If the convicted felon wins, we lose our democracy. Joe Biden has effectively served the U.S. with honor, decency, and dignity. Hard disagree on that. But okay, he says it's time for Joe Biden to step down. Guys, when a guy like Rob Reiner is saying this, I mean, at least this guy is being, like, consistent, right? He's saying, look, if Donald Trump wins, then democracy is over. And so therefore, Joe Biden, since he's not our best chance at defeating Donald Trump, he needs to step aside. At least this guy's like, not just a total Biden loyalist over everything else. And he's showing a little bit of honesty there. Again, would hard disagree with the honor, decency, and dignity. Don't know how that lines up with, arming and funding a genocide, but we move on. We also had this here. This is from Politico. They say, quote, this is a veteran Democratic operative saying, sadly, it seems like he's choosing the hard way, but the outcome will be the same. He won't be the nominee. We have a mad king. A mad king. And that's honestly exactly what it looks like right now. Like, again, the list of Democrats, elected Democrats, who have publicly called on him to drop out, it's a pretty small list. But from the reporting we're getting behind the scenes, it seems like it's almost unanimous from people, even though they're too scared and cowardly to come out and publicly say it, it seems like it's almost unanimous behind the scenes of elected Democrats thinking that Joe Biden needs to drop out. And so with all of this pressure building and Biden just totally refusing to entertain any of it, even a conversation about it, I mean, I don't think it's unfair to describe him as a sort of a mad king at this point, right? But he's also saying, interestingly, that he won't be the nominee. So it seems like there's also a lot of people who are trying to strategize behind the scenes in terms of how they could force Joe Biden to step aside or potentially even go over his head at the DNC convention, which would be absolutely insane. And by the way, I'm going to be there on the ground at the DNC convention covering all of this, but that's going to be absolutely wild if they try to just push him aside and have the delegates nominate somebody else. So, I mean, all of this is it's such a clusterfuck, man. We also had this one, a House Democrat on Biden's interview tonight saying, it made me sad. Completely out of touch with reality and insulated from the truth. I'll be breaking my silence soon. So do it. Do it. Buck up and do it. I mean, what are we waiting for, guys? We also had here from Alex Thompson and a couple more things and I'll finish off. He says, Biden's team drafted the questions for his first 2 post-debate interviews, both on Black radio. The White House was involved in drafting the question per a person familiar with the White House Black media director was not part of the process, and the Biden campaign denies White House involvement. So I think somebody actually got fired for this, one of the radio hosts that they're referencing in this piece. So it's definitely, I think, a real story, but it looks like Biden and his White House were basically feeding the questions, right, for his first couple of interviews after the debate. Now, listen, I mean, I'm sure to some extent most politicians try to do that. If you're the radio host, if you're anybody who wants to call yourself a journalist or if you're covering politics, you never do something like this. You never do something like this. Maybe you'll take a couple of suggestions on questions or general topics if they want to talk about it. That's fine. But you don't just take marching orders from the person you're about to interview if that person is a politician, right? You always have your own questions. You always have different ways that you can poke and prod at them and try to get something out of them and ask difficult questions. So it's embarrassing for the radio hosts, right, on that side of it. But it also was just a sign, I think, that if you watch Joe Biden during the State of the Union, that was passable. And it was passable because he was reading from a teleprompter. So if he's in a situation where he knows the questions ahead of time and he has sort of like a script or like a notes or whatever that he's keeping on him, he can sort of get away with these kinds of things. But if it's something that's like long form, unscripted, no teleprompter, then that's when he utterly collapses. And that's exactly what we saw in that first debate. And I think it's also why we see a historically low amount of, Joe Biden in the public sphere, of going out and doing town halls. When was the last town hall that Joe Biden did? Taking questions from average Americans. What was it, like 2021 or something at this point? Like, he has been hiding himself for a long time. This goes back years and years and years at this point. We also had, again, more of the Trump comparisons. I mean, I was describing to you guys how I thought there was a lot of overlap in terms of their behavior with Trump and Biden there. But we also just have, like, the skin thing going on after, I guess, Biden's team thought that he looked way too pale during the first debate. Now they're just putting on a bunch of, like, bronzer, and he's starting to slowly morph into Donald Trump, sort of, in a way. But, I mean, it's pointed out here by Joe. Orange skin, inappropriate family advisors like Hunter, whining about the elites, erratic behavior, calling into the news. Biden is becoming Trump in real time. And we also had even CNN's Jim Acosta making this same comparison. They say he was stunned by Biden's appearance on Morning Joe, calling it a page from Trump's playbook. So listen, guys, I don't know if like over the next couple of days, the pressure is going to build even more than where it already is. I guess it could if you had a couple of more, high-ranking Democrats that come out and say publicly that he needs to drop out. But clearly there's a lot of panic going on here, right? There's panic in the White House amongst the staff, right? I covered that story a couple of days ago at this point. There's panic from the Democratic Party at large. There's panic from down ballot Democrats in the House and in the Senate in terms of how Biden could potentially negatively impact them. There's panic from the media. There's frustration from the media because they feel like they've been lied to, by the Biden White House about his cognitive fitness. There's panic all around. And I think, honestly, for good reason. Now, the response to this, the solution to this, I guess, is you got to figure something out, man. You guys got to buck up, you got to get some courage, and you got to publicly come out and call on him to drop out. I don't know if then maybe you end up having like some sort of a really quick primary process that takes place, or if maybe it's just some chaos that takes place at the convention. I don't know how this is going to shake out, but the one thing that I'm pretty confident, not 100%, I won't say that, but that I'm pretty confident in saying right now is that it looks like, based on the polling data, that Joe Biden has virtually no path forward to victory if he chooses to put his ego over the American people.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying